Hello, 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 and welcome to the EUROPA INVICTA show. It is I, Alex, the host of your favorite political analysis show. Tonight, we are not discussing political theory. We are not engaging in the polite, sterilized debates orchestrated by the utterly boring legacy media panels. We are executing a forensic, real-time autopsy on a political corpse. We are looking across the English Channel at the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and we are going to audit the terminal fragmentation of the Westminster system. For nearly a decade, the British political class has sold the working population a very specific, highly weaponized illusion. They promised that, by severing their institutional tethers to the European Union, the British state would regain absolute, unadulterated Westphalian sovereignty. They promised secure borders. They promised high-wage local labour markets. They promised a government that would be directly, forcefully accountable to the native population. Instead, we are witnesses to the total liquidation of the British nation-state. To understand the exact scale of this structural collapse, we do not need to look at historical abstractions. We do not need to read the op-eds in the Financial Times. We just need to look at what is happening right now, this week, in the parliamentary constituency of Gorton and Denton. On February 26th, 2026, this Greater Manchester seat is holding a by-election that perfectly crystallizes the death of the British Uniparty. In the July 2024 general election, the Labour Party held an absolute commanding majority here of nearly 51%. It was a fortress of the centre-left. Today, that majority has been entirely vaporized. This constituency acts as a demographic battle axe that is actively severing the establishment. The handle of this axe is composed of highly diverse, urban student wards. These students have completely abandoned the centre politics defining the previous generations. The Green Party has surged to 32% in the polls, capturing the youth with a highly aggressive brand of eco-populism. The head of the axe, however, consists of the post-industrial, white, working-class wards. They have also defected. Reform UK is actively consuming this demographic, sitting at a lethal 29%. The governing Labour Party, the supposed masters of the realm, have plummeted to 26%. They are trapped in a three-way squeeze, crushed in a vice of their own making. The establishment is failing. But before you celebrate the collapse of the spreadsheet managers, you must understand the architecture of what is stepping into the vacuum. Because the uncomfortable, agonizing truth is this: the insurgent populists promising to save you are just as captured, just as compromised, and just as deeply integrated into the global corporate machine as the bureaucrats they claim to be fighting. Tonight, we pull the curtain back. Tonight, we dismantle the saviors. If you still operate under the delusion that the Labour Party is running the United Kingdom for the benefit of the British worker, you are mathematically illiterate. Labour is no longer a political government. It is a highly efficient corporate procurement vehicle equipped with a nuclear deterrent. In 2024, Keir Starmer's Labour Party won a commanding parliamentary supermajority of 411 seats. It was hailed as the ultimate return to sensible, centrist governance. Yet, by early 2026, Starmer's personal net favourability has plummeted to a historic, catastrophic negative 57. A full 75% of the British public views the Prime Minister unfavourably, and only 38% of the people who voted for him in 2024 say they would ever do so again. Now, why does a government with absolute, unchallengeable legislative supremacy experience an immediate terminal collapse in public legitimacy? Because they did not enter government to govern. They entered government to liquidate. They immediately abandoned their voters to serve their shareholders. Under Keir Starmer, the Labour Party executed a calculated, ruthless strategic realignment. They systematically dismantled their grassroots funding models, explicitly telling the trade unions that their money was no longer required. Instead, they aggressively courted private equity firms and corporate lobbyists through exclusive, high-ticket conduits like the Chair Circle. The financial disclosures do not lie. They show a staggering 1,700% surge in massive corporate donations. Let us look at the empirical receipts. Forensic analysis of the electoral ledger reveals that 8 specific multinational companies donated a combined £580,000 to the Labour Party. That is the investment. Now look at the return. Within Labour's first year in power, those exact same companies, those exact same 8 companies, were awarded central government contracts worth nearly £138 million sterling. This is not democratic governance. This is venture capital arbitrage. Corporate lobbyists are purchasing state infrastructure, energy grids, and healthcare contracts for pennies on the pound. And while the corporate donors secure their massive returns on investment, Starmer ruthlessly whips his members of parliament to vote for severe, crushing austerity measures against the native population. He forces chaotic means testing on winter fuel payments for pensioners and stubbornly retains the 2-child benefit cap. He starves the working class to subsidize the corporate class. But the capture is not merely financial. It is morally malignant. It is rotten to the absolute core. In early 2026, the Labour government was engulfed in a crisis of its own making when Keir Starmer unilaterally appointed Peter Mandelson as the United Kingdom's ambassador to Washington, D.C. Peter Mandelson is the quintessential architect of the 1990s New Labour neoliberal project. But more importantly, he is a man with well-documented, extensive historical associations with the infamous Jeffrey Epstein. We talked about the Epstein files succinctly in episode 3. We talked about how the global elite operate on a completely, utterly insulated moral axis. They operate on a level completely shielded from their own depravity. The appointment of Mandelson was a signal. It was Starmer telling the globalist cabal in Washington that the UK is open for business and that the old managers are back in charge. The internal revulsion within the Labour Party to this appointment was so severe, so visceral, that it forced the sudden, explosive resignation of Starmer's own chief of staff and key political strategist, Morgan McSweeney. To compound the rot, Starmer then elevated his former head of communications, Matthew Doyle, to the House of Lords. He gave him a lifetime peerage. This triggered a massive scandal when it was revealed that Doyle had actively campaigned for Sean Morton, a local Scottish Labour politician who was subsequently convicted for, and I'm wondering if you're guessing it, possessing indecent images of children. The establishment is entirely, hermetically insulated from moral accountability. Keir Starmer did not drain the Conservative swamp, he simply took over the management of it. The party has become aggressively authoritarian in its centralization. In the Gorton and Denton by-election, the National Executive Committee, chaired by Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood, outright blocked the highly popular local mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, from standing as a candidate. Now why, you may ask? It is simple. To neutralize a future leadership threat. They do not care about local representation. They only care about control of the Westminster board. Labour is Conservative 3.0. They are heavily tethered to American think tanks like the Progressive Policy Institute, actively importing US bureaucratic models to oversee the calculated decline of the British state. When the working class realizes that the centre-left is just a corporate mirage, they naturally pivot to the populist right. They look for a saviour in the nationalist insurgency. But that is exactly where the trap is waiting. There is a multi-billion-dollar industry built entirely on your anger, and it is called the British populist right. They expertly point to the deindustrialization of your towns, the collapsing public services, and the suffocating engineered cost of net zero mandates. Reform UK and its various splinter factions present themselves as the ultimate, uncompromising anti-establishment insurgency. Let us put that to the test. Let us audit the new darling of the populist right, Rupert Lowe and his Restore Britain movement. To be absolutely clear, Rupert Lowe articulates policies that make complete sense to a disenfranchised population. His unapologetic stance on immigration directly addresses the raw, empirical realities of demographic displacement in a way that the sterilized legacy media entirely avoids. He speaks to genuine, undeniable anxieties, and his platform resonates because it sounds like actual sovereignty. He stands in the House of Commons and publicly builds his brand on virulent, highly articulate opposition to what he calls the cult of climate change. He goes viral on TikTok. He demands the absolute, immediate scrapping of all net zero targets and all green subsidies, telling the working class that environmentalism is a scam designed to destroy their livelihoods. That is his platform. That is the rhetoric he effectively sells to you to harvest your votes. Now, let us look at his praxis. Let us look at his actual ledger. If you bypass his public speeches, ignore his viral clips, and pull his private corporate registry filings from Companies House, a completely different, chilling reality emerges. The man who mocks green energy in public is an active director of Alto Energy Limited, a wholesale supplier of heat pumps. He is also a documented, heavily capitalized investor in Kona Energy, a massive battery storage firm explicitly seeking to, and I quote, deliver the zero carbon future. End of quote. The hypocrisy reaches absolute mathematical perfection when you examine the infrastructure of his private estate. While demanding the state stop subsidizing green initiatives for the public, Lowe quietly utilized the government's renewable heat incentive scheme to install heavily subsidized heat pumps on his own sprawling farming estate. When journalists rightfully confronted him with this glaring contradiction, he did not apologize. He publicly defended taking the state subsidy, calling it a, and I quote again, good return on investment. He is monetizing populist anger for political power, while quietly profiting from the exact same state mandates he claims to despise. This is the fake right. They do not want to dismantle the managerial state. They do not want to destroy the matrix. They just want to secure the government contracts for their own portfolios. Trading Keir Starmer for Rupert Lowe or Nigel Farage is not a revolution. It is just a transfer of wealth from one set of corporate directors to another. And if you look further right past the corporate populists, the fringe has decayed into complete unhinged lunacy. Just look at the UK Independence Party, UKIP. They are the original architect of the Brexit movement. Having lost its monopoly on Euroscepticism, UKIP has morphed into a radicalized fringe entity under the leadership of Nick Tanconi. Desperate for relevance, UKIP literally submitted a new logo application to the Electoral Commission that was modelled directly on the Imperial German and the unspoken era Iron Cross. They subsequently formed the Patriots Alliance with the English Democrats, a group famous primarily for absorbing former members of the fascist British National Party. The entire right-wing spectrum in the United Kingdom is a trap. It is either a highly sophisticated corporate grift designed to manage your decline, or it is a containment zone for toxic extremists designed to render you politically radioactive. Hydration break, ladies and gentlemen. I wanted to say that at least we still have water, but it's full of microplastics. So, the greatest bait and switch in modern political history was not about the abstract concept of sovereignty. It was about your paycheck. It was about your material reality. The core promise of the Brexit withdrawal was the protection of the native labour market. The working class was told explicitly that by leaving the European Union, the state would restrict the endless supply of cheap foreign labour. The logic was sound. If you restrict the labour supply, you force corporations to compete for workers. You force them to raise local wages, improve working conditions, and invest in domestic training. Let us audit the ledger of the Office for National Statistics and see what the managers actually did. Now, the government did, in fact, decouple from the European worker. That was true. By the end of 2024, the number of EU nationals in payroll employment in the United Kingdom had fallen by 13%. 2.3 million European workers exited the British economy, predominantly from the hospitality and administrative sectors. But the managers did not tighten the labour market to help the British worker. They did not raise your wages, they simply widened a different valve. To offset the loss of European labour and prevent massive multinational companies from having to pay higher native wages, the government flooded the system with a highly globalized workforce. Net migration estimates for non-EU nationals surged to a staggering positive 383,000 in the year ending June 2025. This is the ultimate manifestation of Excel culture calculation. The British establishment permanently pivoted away from European labour integration and toward a highly globalized, visa-dependent workforce. You may rightfully ask, why? You must understand, you have the obligation to understand the psychology of the spreadsheet manager to answer that question. A global migrant unit is simply cheaper. They are infinitely more compliant. Their visa is tied entirely to their employment, meaning they have zero leverage. They are exponentially less likely to unionize, complain about safety standards, or demand a raise than a British worker. They are the perfect, frictionless economic unit. The populist electorate was subjected to a calculated, malicious demographic bait and switch. You voted to secure your perimeter. You voted to protect your community. And the state took your vote, weaponized it, and used it to completely liquidate your leverage in the labor market. They artificially propped up the GDP spreadsheet by replacing the European worker with a global unit. leaving the British working class entirely abandoned, priced out of their own towns, and completely expendable in the crossfire of global capital. The architects of Brexit told you they were escaping a sinking ship. They told you the European Union was a decaying, bureaucratic relic, destined for fragmentation. Instead, they locked you out of a fortress. Driven by the immense geopolitical pressure of American transactionalism and Russian military aggression, the European Union is not fracturing. It is rapidly, aggressively centralizing into a highly operational federal superpower. And the United Kingdom, having arrogantly severed its institutional tethers, has relegated itself to the pathetic status of a peripheral, isolated border state. Inside the EU single market, Britain held the pen. They sat at a table, in a very privileged position might I add, and helped write the regulations that became the global default. Outside the bloc, the UK is entirely subject to the gravitational pull of the Brussels effect. British manufacturers are forced to comply with European environmental and product standards just to maintain market access, but the British people have been permanently stripped of the institutional power to vote on how those standards are created. They are regulatory takers, absorbing the friction of the empire without any of the representation. The most terrifying, visceral manifestation of this isolation is military. The European Union has recognized the absolute necessity of hard power. They recently initiated the Rearm Europe plan and the Security Action for Europe program, the SAFE program you might have heard of, unlocking an enormous envelope of 150 billion euros to aggressively federalize the European defense industrial base. When the UK government attempted to integrate British defense contractors into this very lucrative pipeline, Brussels treated them exactly like a third country vassal. The European Union demanded a staggering €6 billion entry fee just to sit at the table, a sum equivalent to 10% of the UK's entire annual defense budget. The UK was humiliated. They were locked out. Deprived of the European shield, the border state must seek protection elsewhere. As such, they have entirely, unconditionally capitulated to the United States of America. The 2025 economic prosperity deal with Washington provides the forensic receipt of this subjugation. The United States did not negotiate with the United Kingdom, they dictated terms. The US brutally capped UK manufactured vehicle imports at a mere 100,000 units before triggering punitive 25% tariffs, destroying the growth of the British automotive sector. In exchange for this pathetic concession, the UK was forced to unilaterally remove its 20% tariff on US beef, absorbing 13,000 metric tons of American agricultural products annually. The UK handed its leash, economically, to Washington while begging Brussels for military scraps. This total geopolitical isolation fundamentally neuters the domestic political insurgents. Look at Europe. The European Populist right has consolidated its power within the EU Parliament, forming the Patriots for Europe group, uniting 85 MEPs under the leadership of Jordan Bardella. But Reform UK is completely cut off from this massive continental power bloc because of Brexit. Nigel Farage, not that I love him, is a political orphan in Europe. In order to survive, he has outsourced British populism to American tech oligarchs. He relies on figures like Elon Musk, who bypass traditional media to homogenize grievances across borders and fund the transatlantic MAGA network. And how do these elites keep the population distracted while the nation is sold off for parts? they use the algorithmic friction of the streets. In the summer of 2024, catastrophic civil disorder erupted across the United Kingdom. The state vacuum following the horrific Southport attacks was instantly filled by a highly coordinated disinformation campaign amplified by far-right influences like Tommy Robinson and algorithmically supercharged by tech billionaires. Post-organizational neo-fascist networks like the Active Clubs, which are transnational mixed martial arts groups preparing young men for ethnic conflict under the guise of fitness fraternities, mobilized the streets. Influencers drew up to 150,000 people to a Unite the Kingdom rally in London. They featured international speakers, explicitly promoting the Great Replacement theory and demanding the dissolution of the UK Parliament. They expertly propagate the two-tier policing myth, creating a powerful narrative of reverse victimization. This ensures that when rioters are arrested, they do not view it as justice, but as political martyrdom, deepening the cycle of radicalization. But what is the actual, kinetic result of this street-level chaos? Does it secure sovereignty? Does it rebuild the working class? Absolutely not. It provides the exact friction the managerial requires. It provides the exact friction the managerial state requires to close the cage. The government utilized the 2024 riots to normalize an aggressive, authoritarian crackdown on civil liberties. Police forces vastly expanded the use of mass facial recognition surveillance, drawing direct condemnation from the UN Human Rights Committee. The state initiated the 2026 Lord MacDonald Review to assess the cumulative impact of protests, creating a legal architecture explicitly designed to suppress any persistent dissenting assembly. As even the Muslim Council of Britain warned, this cumulative impact metric is entirely subjective and will be used to crush all civil rights demonstrations across the board. The far-right influences are not fighting the Matrix. They are the Matrix's most valuable asset. They generate the violent, chaotic data points the state desperately needs to justify the total algorithmic securitization of the public square. You cannot vote your way out of a mathematical liquidation. If the center-left is a corporate procurement vehicle, if the populist right is a hypocritical grift tethered to Silicon Valley, and if the streets are an algorithmic trap designed to build a surveillance state, where does the sovereign citizen go? You must completely, unapologetically reject the Westminster savior model. To prove why top-down political solutions are mathematically dead, we just need to look at the catastrophic, embarrassing failure of the socialist far left. Following their alienation from Keir Starmer's neoliberal government, figures like Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana launched a new, explicitly socialist entity called Your Party. Capitalizing on immense grassroots frustration, they amassed 60,000 paying members. Did they use this incredible manpower to secure local infrastructure? Did they organize rent strikes? No, they immediately descended into a bitter, narcissistic civil war over control of their own executive council. Factions named The Many and Grassroots Left fought a vicious proxy war. Zara Sultana unilaterally declared herself an MP for the party, triggering sudden resignations and completely destroying the fragile project before it even began. Or look at the Independent Alliance in Parliament. Despite having 5 MPs, which is, by the way, more than the Green Party, they have been entirely shut out of the legislative process. The establishment denied them seats on select committees and legally barred them from receiving short money state funding. Your party and the parliamentary fringe proved that looking for a saviour in Westminster always ends in factional ego battles and institutional marginalisation. They are fighting over hollow titles in London while the rest of the country burns. Now, contrast that pathetic infighting with the empirical reality of lateral material action. Look at Unite the Union, Britain's second largest trade union. Under the leadership of General Secretary Sharon Graham, Unite executed a historic pivot. They explicitly decoupled from the Parliamentary Labour Party, bluntly refusing to endorse the 2024 manifesto. They focused relentlessly on localized industrial militancy. The results? Unite authorized over 1,000 industrial disputes, winning 80% of them, and secured £450 million in enhanced wages for their members. Look at the RMT union under Mick Lynch and Eddie Dempsey, paralysing the transport network to successfully defend their members against mass redundancies. They did not ask permission from a politician or a local council. They did not wait for an election cycle. They organised the workforce, applied kinetic economic leverage, and extracted material security for their people. This is the only path forward. You must build a handshake ledger. The corporate elites have already functionally seceded from the nation. Look at the financial risk premium gap between London and the economically starved regional peripheries. It currently stands at an astounding 250 to 300 basis points. That is the exact same long-term risk gap that exists between the sovereign bonds of the United Kingdom and Romania on global financial markets. London operates on a completely different planetary axis than the post-industrial towns of the north. The managers view your community purely as a disposable extraction zone. Real change does not come from a billionaire tech oligarch tweeting about sovereignty. It comes from collective, lateral solidarity. It comes from tenant unions physically blocking corporate evictions. It comes from community-owned energy cooperatives bypassing the national grid. It comes from establishing local food sovereignty and starving the uniparty of their compliance. If you want true British sovereignty, you have to stop handing your proxy to the elites wearing populists' masks. You starve the fakes, you fund the grassroots, and you rebuild the political architecture from the local council upwards. You must secure the municipal grid. You must provide the buffer yourself. Because if you refuse to work together at the neighborhood level, you will continue to be divided, atomized, and conquered by a Westminster elite that views you as nothing more than a socio-economic obstacle to GDP growth. I will leave you with a verse from the ancient ledger. One second. Just need to find it. Here we are. Woe to the shepherds of Israel who only take care of themselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? You eat the curds. You clothe yourselves with the wool and slaughter the choice animals, but you do not take care of the flock. You have not strengthened the weak, or healed the sick, or bound up the injured. You have not brought back the strays or searched for the lost. You have ruled them harshly and brutally. The shepherds of Westminster have abandoned the flock to feast on the marrow of the nation. It is time to stop looking to them for salvation. Reclaim the ancient path. Secure the organic fortress. Sovereignty or extinction. And the future belongs to the sovereign. Thank you very much for watching. I will be coming back next Friday, as promised, at 1700 Central European Time. In the description, you will find a link to my Telegram channel, TikTok account, and Instagram account. They are not heavily populated yet. I will get to that as soon as I can. Thank you once again for watching. Like and subscribe. Please comment your thoughts. But no matter what, do not let them keep you in the dark. Good night.